to introduce you to our special guest and keynote speaker, Dr. S Mantha. To introduce about him, he is an eminent academician and able administrator. He was the chairman of the All India Council for Technical Education from January 2012 to January 2015. Having joined AICTE in 2009 as its vice chairman, he was at the forefront of bringing in some radical changes for transparency and accountability in its administration. On his completion of tenure at AICTE, he worked as the Professor of Robotics, CAD/CAM and Artificial Intelligence in the Department of Mechanical Engineering at VJTI, Mumbai. He superannuated on 31st May 2016. He is the recipient of the Infocom CMAI National Telecom Award for 2010 and the HR Nexus HR and Network Leadership Award in the field of education 2010. The e-governance project implemented in AICTE has also won the Silver Edge Award instituted by the United Business Media and Information Week and the Good Governance National Technology Award 2010. He is also a recipient of the 5th National Telecom Award in 2011 for excellence in education through e-governance instituted by the CMAI and Star News. He has more than 240 publications in national and international journals and conferences to his credits, as also he has guided more than 23 PhD students who have completed their PhD under him. So I request Dr. Mantha to please come on the stage.
That is probably a caution. First of all, thank you for inviting me to share some of my views on the employability and whatever is associated with that. I don't have a presentation, but I would want to speak to you. And that way probably it would be a little better in communicating. But it's always good to have a structured approach in when you speak to an audience. But some of the views that we express may not always be structured. So therefore, it's much better to be with you on one-to-one basis. Now a lot has been said. I have some points which I'll use. These days people speak to you in conversations, in private, in public, and so on terms like employment, employability, and so on. Now, we really need to understand that these two are different. Employment is the opportunity that is available outside, and the employability is a skill that you possess. And both are required for that paradigm to be completed. We should have employable skills, and there also must be employment opportunities available outside. Now, when I say employment opportunities need to be available outside, it means many things. First of all, let's look at both these dimensions, and then we will understand what is happening in the marketplace. When I talk of employment opportunities, fundamentally we have three employment markets outside. One is the primary employment market. Okay? What is primary employment market? Something that has to do with the produce from the earth is the primary employment market. which means agriculture, mining, and so on. Anything that has to do with the earth, produced from the earth. And that is the primary employment market. The world over, the employment potential of a primary employment market is about 15%. Now in India, we talk about 50%, more than 50% employed in agriculture. Is that really a fact? Now a lot of things are associated with this. First of all, what is employment? If I work part-time, is it employment? If I work full-time and I'm engaged throughout 365, 24/7, is that employment? And so on. Agriculture certainly is seasonal, and therefore it doesn't give you 50% employment throughout the year. So saying that 50% of my population is employed in agriculture is actually a misnomer. So we need to really look at these things differently. The world over, produced from the earth, the primary employment market shares 15% of the employment opportunities across all subsidiaries that come out with the primary employment sector. Now, having said that, the past has seen that the mining market has almost come to a standstill because of various interventions of the courts and things like that. Now, that affects the employment markets because it doesn't allow you to get into the secondary markets and the tertiary markets. And agriculture, we know, is heavily dependent on the natural phenomena, and therefore it also can be affected over a period of time, and therefore the primary employment market suffers. The secondary employment market is heavily dependent on manufacturing. Now, the secondary employment market does well if the primary employment market is good. Now, because the mining sector has almost come to a standstill, the manufacturing gets affected. Now, manufacturing has other issues in that. For example, heavy automation has come about in our industries. To be competitive with the global standards, you have to use the methods that are used elsewhere to be competitive. Otherwise, your products will not be purchased outside, you will not be able to export them if the quality deficit exists. So therefore, you have to compete with them, with the global markets, and therefore the quality has to be similar to what exists outside. In that process, a heavy automation has come in. For example, in the earlier days, we had serial manufacturing setups in, for example, the automobile industry. Incidentally, manufacturing industries are driven by two important activities. One is automobile, the other is construction. Why are they so important? They drive more than 300 ancillaries with them. Therefore, the secondary employment market suffers if manufacturing suffers. Okay. So, the manufacturing part, in order to be successful, like I said, has to compete with the global markets, and therefore you also have to implement the complete automation that happens across the world. Now, what is actually happening across the world? In the earlier days, like I said, there was a serial manufacturing, which means everything was within the manufacturing setup, and there was a product layout, there was a process layout, all the machines, similar machines put together, or the assembly line designed on the product that comes out at the end of the day. and so on. So these are traditional methods which were being used over a period of time. Now that had to change with the concept of computer numerically controlled machine tools and DNC, direct numerically controlled machine tools. The whole concept changed. The entire manufacturing, which was based on primitives, changed to something that was unthinkable. Anything could be manufactured apart from the primitives. Primitives means geometric objects based on solid geometry. Now, when CNCs came in, the remaining 93% of manufacturing was possible to be done by primitives. Now, that remaining 7% was the growth that happened because of computer numerically controlled machine tools. Anything could be manufactured now. Now, with that concept, and with the advent of, with the development that took place in communications, in manufacturing technology, the machine tools, and so on, and people started looking at the market forces. Now, what does that mean? There was a study done by the World Automobile Association, and they found that the first 7 large automobile manufacturing companies came from Japan. There is no Ford, there is nothing. There was no GM, no Chrysler, nothing in that list. 7 of the major auto manufacturers were Japanese companies. And they found what was the problem here. Why is this happening? And the single most point that came out was 96% of their manufacturing in Japanese companies was outsourced. They don't manufacture everything inside like the traditional old methods. If they look at the returns on investment that happens, and will shift the manufacturing to any place of the world, any part of the world, wherever it makes sense. So you came up with things like pistons being manufactured somewhere in some country, the crankshafts being manufactured somewhere, and so on. And what were the Japanese doing? They used to bring them all back and assemble them and sell them. So 96% of their manufacturing was outsourced. At that point of time, Ford had only 47% outsourcing. So they were never competitive. So slowly things changed, and all these processes, the outsourcing business became much more pronounced in the sense that one could use internet, one could use the CNCs. You don't have a product layout, process layout in your country. What you do is you find out the best labor, market, whichever country is available, provide a process layout in that country, provide all your CNCs in that country, and you do the programming sitting somewhere else on the globe, and you fire your programs through internet onto the machines located somewhere, and they will start producing because the CNC just operates on a point in space. So any point in space can be connected, which means anything can be manufactured. Now with this idea and with the direct numerical control that was possible, people started using the dynamics that existed across the world. What this did was it disrupted the entire manufacturing industry. Where were the jobs? Who had the jobs? Who lost jobs? This is a matter for debate and so on. Now that is what happened in the manufacturing sector. Look at the IT sector, which was, we didn't participate in industrial revolution, but we were certainly a part of IT revolution. And what happened in IT? There were entry-level jobs. People thought of, being trained in programming, in C, Java. There was a time when people used to go by the hordes. TCS, Wipro, Infosys, they were all sending trained people in C, C++, Java and so on. They used to send them outside. Not anymore. Now what is happening is AI has taken over. Artificial intelligence, intelligent intelligent agents, they start doing the pseudocode at the back end, which means you don't need people. You just set up certain boundary conditions, the code is available automatically. So you don't need the entry-level programmers. So the entire market, the entry-level market has collapsed. So there is no more people at the entry level, learning good Java programming or good C programming, finding a job outside, no more. So what is happening to this employment market? At one time, we used to define a pyramid-like structure. You need more people at the base with less trained skills and going upwards, and then you had some experts at the top and so on. No more of that kind is happening. If you look at the employment market today, it's like a pipe-like structure. Your base is completely collapsing, and you need people with higher order skills at the entry level now, which means the low order skills are all going out. They are being taken over by automation, intelligent tools, and so on. And you have to be competitive. You have to do the same thing. There's no shortcut in this because you have to compete with the global markets. Now, if you go to Taiwan and see any of their exhibitions, you tell them the product that you want to manufacture, and they will give you the machine in the evening. That's the kind of technology that is, going around the globe. So that happens to be the employment side. So we looked at the secondary markets. The world over, secondary employment market gives you about 35% of jobs. It can generate 35% of jobs. Now, in India, the manufacturing sector has been growing at 17% over a period of time, and now it's become 15%. So it's actually, collapsing in some sense. And where there can be any number of reasons, we are not going into those reasons at this point of time. But the point that we have to look at is the manufacturing sector is shrinking in terms of percentage growth. Whereas it can generate 35-40% of the overall jobs that are available, if it is not doing well, then that gets affected. Now the tertiary sector is a service sector. Okay? Tertiary employment sector is a service sector. Now, service sector across the world has a potential of about 60% of jobs, generation of jobs, which means that sector can provide employment to maximum 60%. Now try and look at what the supply side happened. What we looked at is the demand side. Now, on the supply side, we have about 6 million graduates passing out every year, all put together, art, science, commerce, engineering, everything. Out of that, 1 million graduates happen to be in the technical education space. Okay? So rest of the people are on art, science, commerce, and the other graduates. Can we say that we have 6 million commensurate jobs? When I say commensurate jobs, an engineer must get into an engineering job. Like that. There could be overlapping, that's fine. So can we with any confidence say that there are 6 million jobs year on year, which means every year, right? Every year available to get these fellows employed, right? So when that does not happen, if I do not guarantee that many jobs in each of those sectors, what really happens is they will start looking for wherever job is available, which means you will find an engineer going to a service sector where probably it is not his job to do that. He probably should end up in a manufacturing sector or in a construction sector and so on, in an industry-oriented job. He doesn't do it because there is no job there. So therefore, what you will see is underemployment. Underemployment is not as bad as no employment, but then it is a concern. You can't, then what happens is, where does the fellow who is supposed to fit there is going? You know? So therefore, we have this kind of issues. The other dimension to this problem is the informal sector versus formal sector. We have a huge informal sector. Almost 93% of our entire employment scene is informal, which means there is a panwala, there is a vada wala, there is all kinds of jobs which don't come under the labor laws. Okay, so what remains, and all the figures that we are looking at is only the formal sector. So therefore, there are a lot of dimensions to this employment kind of problem. Now, there is something called as competency-based skills and credit-based credentialing. Okay? In fact, if you go to some of the US institutions, the fees that they charge to a student, tuition fees that they charge a student, is actually based on the number of credits the course has. Okay, not on any other. So a single credit will cost so much, so total credits multiply, that's the tuition fees. And they take a serious view of the credit-based credentialing. The credential is based on the credits that you acquire. In the old days, you had an open loop kind of accreditation. The NAAC, of course, both are NAAC and NBA in the technical space, both are basically accreditation metrics. One does a program-based accreditation, the other one does an institution-based accreditation, but both fundamentally follow similar principles. In the olden days, you had, or in the early days of accreditation or measuring quality, you had an open loop system, which means what? You provide so many classrooms, you provide so many teachers, you provide so much of infrastructure. This will be the quality. Now, there was no way of measuring what that quality was. As long as I provided the inputs, the quality was expected to happen. Right? Now, that was what we started off with. And over a period of time, we are now defining the program outcomes, the course outcomes, and some methodologies to measure them, and so on. Which means what you are trying to do is you are defining upfront what is a course outcome, what is a program outcome, and then go and try and measure them. It's a very difficult job to actually measure what is a course outcome, what is a program outcome. Some of the people who have gone in that process will understand what I am saying. It's good to write a paper, it's good to say that this is what you do, but it's not as simple as we say. So, still there is a process, and this is what people do. They define the course outcome, the program outcome, go about and measure them, and say that now this institution follows, and so on, and that's how we have to. So this is a typical closed loop system minus something. In a closed loop system, in a control theory model, what happens is there is an input. For every design, there is an input. Some inputs will be there. You expect some outcomes, and there is a certain process. So these inputs, they get into the process and they deliver you the outcomes. Now you have to define what this process is. Depending on what the system is, your process can be different. Now, I expect certain outcome, right? When I write my outcomes, that is what I expect. When I go and measure, that may not be the outcome. So there is a gap, there is a difference. So measure that difference, okay? If you can, right? In physical systems, we can do all that. And in systems which move more into abstract sense, it becomes a little difficult. So I have a certain course outcome, I have certain program outcome, I know what I want, I go and measure and I find that there is a gap. So what the difference is the error. Now I have to do something with that error in order to correct the system. Otherwise this closed loop doesn't close, right? So error will be there forever. And someone else may come, use a subjective methodology and say that there is no error. So somebody has to look at this in a rational fashion. So you expect something, you get something, difference is the error. What do you do with the error? That error you add to the input again and run the cycle again. So when you keep doing this, again you measure the error in the second cycle, again you add it to the input, third cycle, fourth cycle, and somewhere the error margin will reduce. In every cycle the error will have to reduce. Right? And somewhere it will never become same. Mathematically same is not correct. So there will be some percentage error which is acceptable. That is where the closed loop completes. But none of our accreditation systems function like that. But the world has moved ahead. The problem with this kind of system, with this closed loop kind of accreditation system, what happens is, in order to get at the right result, you have to keep doing this, cycle, add the error, measure the error, add it to the input, again measure the error, until we come to that acceptable zone. Keep doing that, and this process takes a lot of time. In control theory terms, it's called disturbance, and that disturbance to settle will take a massive amount of time. So therefore, achieving the perfect institution, so-called perfect institution with perfect quality metrics is probably not possible. And it takes a huge amount of time. So what people are doing now in the West and in Europe, most of the institutions, like you talk about accreditation agencies like AICTE or IET or whatever, in the technical education space, there are many other, there are almost 64, 65 accreditation agencies. Most of them are moving on to what is called an adaptive system. Now, adaptive system, what it does is, in a quality matrix, what happens is, you have several elements. Like, for example, if I want to define the quality of an institution, I have students, I have faculty, I have infrastructure, I have society, I have industry, I have so many elements which define my quality. Right? I am measuring each one of them in some way and trying to prove something. Suppose, instead of writing course outcomes and program outcomes, suppose I write student outcomes, I write faculty outcomes, I write in what do you expect out of each element in that chain which you are defining as an institution. So now you write each element's input, look at that element as a process and its outcomes, and you figure out a closed chain around that element. Which means in a closed loop, what happens is, if I find some error, like I said, that error is going through the entire chain of links. It goes through students, it goes through faculty, the faculty may not be really, there may not be an error there. But your closed loop sees that the error function that you are adding to the input is also traveling through every single element. Don't do that. So in a physical sense, what happens is you define the elemental outcomes and then you close that by correcting, measure the gap. If you expect a certain outcome of the student, measure that, close that, go to the next element and things like that. This is what the world is moving towards. And therefore, these things, if you look at with an impassionate mind, without being driven by motivated ideas, you will understand what is happening in this process. The expectation from the system is becoming very, very high, and the error for the margin for error is becoming very, very small. So therefore, the credit-based credentialing becomes extremely important. And if you go outside, the institutions keep talking about, credit-based CBC or whatever. The other point that is required, like I said, because of the massive automation that is disturbing the employment markets, the upskilling, reskilling becomes extremely important, and therefore the ecosystem must provide for this. No longer a mechanical engineering person, a graduate in mechanical engineering, will be able to hold on to himself if he knows only mechanical engineering. There are no devices outside in the market which are only mechanical engineering based, only electrical engineering based, or whatever. Whatever product you look at today is a summation of several technologies. You look at your washing machine, there is mechanical, there is electrical, there is electronic, there are all kinds of things. And there are also centers for washing where several washing machines are networked together, and the programming is done from somewhere else, and things work. So you have, in fact, your vehicle that you drive today, today's vehicle is a classic example. It has almost everything that you can think of. And you also must have heard of something called as IoT, Internet of Things. Anything that can communicate is a thing, and Internet provides a medium. So in the world, anything with which you can communicate, digitally communicate, is a device to be connected. And therefore, today's technology has several sensors, several interconnected, and so on. And they keep receiving data, they keep sending data, and so on. So new areas are emerging, and people who have been there for 5 years, 10 years in a certain job are no longer assured of any kind of continuity in their employment unless they reskill, unless they upskill. People, you must have heard of data analytics and big data and things like that. A lot of data is generated today. If you have 10 sensors, each sensor transmits some data. No? So cumulatively it becomes massive data. And you think of how many vehicles are there, how many things are there, and how many devices are there which control our basic life today. You have a Fitbit kind of device, and there's so many sensors and they communicate with your mobile, things like that. So, and you can set it up, you can communicate with your doctor, with your lawyer, with all kinds of things are being done today. So therefore, upskilling, reskilling, upskilling is extremely important, and without which the person can become redundant in the very job that he is doing. We have saturated job markets in several areas, so we need to really look at new employment markets. Unless the professional is challenged in his own backyard, new ideas will not emerge. Innovation will never happen. You have to constantly challenge yourself. What is innovation? Any process, anything that you do differently, which will add some value, is innovation. Don't look at it from a manufacturing sense or some product sense, and nothing of the kind. Whatever you are doing today, if you do differently today, which will add value to that process, is innovation. So, innovation now connected with a business model means something else, and so on. So people are looking at constantly, you have food applications where they, profile your, from the way you operate from the way from the sites that you search, and all those issues. And there are applications which will actually tell you, if you are in Colaba, they will tell you these are the good hotels, all kinds of applications are there today. So these kind of jobs were not even thought of at one point of time. So the world is evolving. Some jobs are saturated, some new jobs are coming in. So unless you challenge yourself every single day, every single minute, new opportunities don't arise. Now, even from a government's perspective, new job markets have to be constantly evolved in order to beat the blues in that sense. In that sense, I have some suggestions in the sense you can think of. These are, I mean, anybody can get these kind of things, ideas. We have a huge network of roads, right? We have how many thousands of kilometers or millions of kilometers of highways we have, and we're building new ones every single day. Now tell me, when you go from Bombay to Pune on the highway, if there is an accident, serious accident, how soon will an ambulance come to you? Or any kind of help will come to you? Think of that. Now, look at a business model around this. In Germany, there is what is called as a yellow angel. On German roads, it's a tempo. It's like a tempo which carries minimal, first aid equipment to stop blood, to provide initial relief, and so on. And there are applications which are connecting this yellow angel, to the nearest hospital. It's all GPS based and so on, to the nearest hospitals and so on, nearest doctors and so on. All those databases are available. And what this yellow angel does is, it just goes around in its territory and picks up these things and goes ahead. Okay, this is the job that this fellow does. Now look at the kind of highways we have, and do we have even a single such application? You can have a porta cabin on every 2 to 3 kilometers on our highways, and on those highways you can have 3-4 people manning this. You can have a yellow angel on every 3 kilometers, and you can also sell merchandise. You can sell some tea, coffee, something like that, and then you see the ecosystem that you create for a new job opportunity. Okay, this is the one. The second one, look at how many a cow can be a real kamdin. Think about what you can do. There are so many, things that are being said and things like that. There's a Fitbit. Can you create a cow bit? Put it on the, on the scale. Locate it on the scale. Measure its white blood count and find out if it has a problem. It can increase the milk production multifold. Look at the byproducts that can be created. A whole lot of new job opportunities can be created. Now people could say, where will the money come from? The maximum telecom subscriber base is in India. And even if for everything that we do, if we have a mobile, a minimum of 250 rupees we spend every month on our basic calls and things like that. Now when there is a mobile that is purchased, if you have a tariff of 25 rupees, it can cater to most of your, this highway funding, the Yellow Angel application funding can be made. And the other sector is the health sector, where numerous amount of jobs are available. There's a paramedical skilling that is required. There are paramedics who are required. Nothing to do with the medical councils and so on. Paramedics anyway doesn't come under that. Now, if you look at them, have huge opportunities, employment opportunities within that space. Any number of models can be created. Funding is not a problem. Funding can always be done. The Ayushman Bharat, scheme can always be funded by many of these schemes, in addition to the job opportunities that they create. Some reference may have been given on the employability skills that we are talking about must be linked seamlessly with online and blended learning, and the skills building within the 4 years, 3 years, 4 years that a student remains with the institution. It can be done with not purely online education, but must be dotted with blended learning, which means some hands-on skills is also a part of the job. So the supply side requirements can be enhanced. We have a huge network of DRDO labs, CSIR labs, and all kinds of research centers are available. In fact, each DRDO lab is a great. You should take an opportunity to go and see them, and you will understand the kind of infrastructure that they are sitting on. Now, I would have seen there is a very good part of the higher education policy that you have given, where you've tried to differentiate between teaching institutions and research institutions and so on. Now, you have also referred to the state universities, the private universities, and we have all kinds of terminology. Deemed university, deemed to be universities, and so on. I mean, I have never understood why it should be a deemed to be university. Then when does it become a university? I mean, my simple question is, when does it become a university? If it is deemed, then I don't know what it actually means. So anyway, I would have liked to see one more. Think about this. That will end here. Think about this. It has huge potential of creating new employment markets and things like that. Ultimately, whatever we do must connect to employment. Otherwise, it just remains within the realm of research and so on. Research is good, but then it must be connected to something, because you also spend money to do research. So finally, what I would want to tell you is, we have several universities, we have several good institutions in the country. But what really happens is, they all do a disaggregated research. Go to IITs. Any amount of good research you will find there. You will find the best of the researchers within the IITs, within our Institute of Science, or whichever institute you talk about. But hardly that research coalesces into something tangible. It never does. I am a good researcher. I move with the best of the people, but my area is so small. I produce best of the papers there. But what is that? Where does it fit into the larger picture? Nobody is really looking into that part. So, can we do something about this? And thousands of PhDs are produced on this count and so on. Now, suppose we pick up one institution in this large space, whichever institution, it could be IIT, it could be anything. Pick up an institution to act as a lead center, nodal center, and you create groups of institutions which are good in a specific discipline. For example, the electrical engineering. You find out electrical engineering faculty must be there in different universities across the country. So bring those institutions together and create a supply chain of good electrical engineering. We'll call it electrical engineering supply chain. Similarly, you'll have mechanical engineering, you'll have computers, you'll have all those. So you have created a lead center, and we are not creating any new institution. It's only we are aggregating what is available within the system. So we have created new supply chains around this. We will also tie up the DRDO labs, the CSIR labs with these supply chains. Okay, so the research element comes into this. There are any number of equipment which are being imported, be it defense, be it railways, be it infrastructure, be it whatever, healthcare. There's a lot of equipment that is imported. For example, even your 16 mm barrel gun used by the defense forces is imported, and the truck-mounted gun, which is 30 mm, is also imported. Now, there are technologies which are difficult to do there, but research is for that. So now, in fact, while at AICTE, we were working with DRDO and the earlier chairman, and the snow mobile, which moves on snow at the higher altitude, is also important. Now, what we want to do is get these equipment, disaggregate them into subsystems. Okay? The electrical systems of equipment which you import, like the truck-mounted gun or whatever, you separate them out into electrical systems, mechanical, and so on. And your supply chains that you have created around your institutions, you attach these subsystems to each of those things. Now, the single most point on the table is to create a prototype of the subsystem by the supply chain that you have created. The only job for them is to create the prototype. Papers and things will come. So the primary motive is not paper presentation per se, but productization per se. Now what happens here is the central institution will later on aggregate again and create the component to the specifications that are required and so on. Now, this is not a new model. There is a very fundamentally used model in Germany. In Germany, you have only two types of institutions, universities. One is a Max Planck University, the other is a Fraunhofer University. Max Planck University looks at basic research and postulations and research and the deliverables in terms of applications. Now the applied science is taken out by the Fraunhofer University. So Fraunhofer University will be located on maybe 2,000 acres, 1,000 acres, and all kinds of industries, their research centers will be located on the campus. So the targets are set based on the societal requirements, on the governmental requirements, and so on. And the entire ecosystem that you have created only works on that prototype. And therefore you find maximum number of products coming out of, and the best products coming out of Germany. Germany is known for the best engineering in the world. Thank you.